Hey there! Time for week 2, Wednesday. This chapter is called Consequences. Jotham's heart stopped and his mouth went dry. His knees began to shake and he felt all the blood drain from his head. Dicha of Megiddo sat at the table, staring at Jotham and his companions, picking his teeth with a knife. He smiled, but it was not the smile of a friend glad to see a long-lost companion. It was the smile of one who enjoyed killing and was about to do so. The 3 other men were still talking. Finally, Nathan noticed the look on Jotham's face. He looked towards the door, then he too felt the blood drain from his head. A moment later, the 2 other men noticed and recognized Dicha. They didn't know about the trouble Jotham and Nathan had barely lived through, but they did know that Dicha was an evil man and that any room he was in was not a safe room. "So," Dicha said, drawling out so that it struck the group like a bullwhip, "the fool is no fool and tries to make a fool of Dicha of Megiddo." Nathan set his jaw and drew his shoulders up straight, but said nothing. Jotham's knees shook even harder as Dicha turned towards him. "I have followed you far, little one," Dicha said as he stared at Jotham. "I thought I had lost you forever. But then in you walk like a lamb to the slaughter." He threw back his head and laughed, and it sounded to Jotham like the roar of a lion and the laugh of a hyena put together. Silas the merchant and Hashras of Bethlehem stepped up beside Nathan, ready to join him in whatever was to come. As Dicha's attention was on Jonathan, Nathan whispered, "Hashra, when the fighting starts, take Jotham and run." "Friend, you are outnumbered. I cannot leave you to fight alone." Hash was right, of course. Dicha had 4 tall men with him, each with muscles that looked to Jotham like trunks of trees, and swords that were longer than Jotham was tall. "No," Nathan hissed. "Save the boy. There is a priest, Zechariah, who lives in the hills to the north. Take the boy there. He will be safe." Hashra didn't like the idea of leaving his friends to fight 5 bigger men, but he knew he must honor Nathan's wishes. "Very well," he whispered. "I shall take care of the boy. Jehovah be with you." Suddenly, Dicha turned his attention to Nathan. "And you, fool," he spat, drawing his curved sword. "It is you who stole my prize, and for that you must die." Dicha's sword sliced through the air directly at Nathan's stomach, but Nathan jumped aside. Grabbing a chair, he swung at Dicha's arm, knocking the sword from his hand. Silas, too, jumped up a chair just as Dicha's 4 men jumped up and drew their own swords. In that same moment, Hashra swept Jotham into his arms and headed for the back of the inn, calling on the innkeeper to help his friends. Jotham kicked and screamed at Hashra to let him go, help Nathan, but Hashra held tight. Dicha screamed in pain and anger. He picked up his sword and began hacking at the chair Nathan held up in defense. The other 4 men had surrounded Silas, blocking Jotham's view. In a moment that was burned into Jotham's memory forever, he watched as 2 of the men drew their swords. A moment later, Silas fell to the ground in a heap and didn't move. Jotham screamed and watched the 4 men surround Nathan. Just as he and Hashra slammed through the door and out into the night, Nathan looked Jotham square in the eye and mouthed one word. "Shalom," he said, which means peace. And then the door slammed shut just as a long, curved sword sliced through the air, directly at Nathan's neck. Everything went black as Hashra carried Jotham into the night with Jotham still screaming. "Quiet, I bid you, little one," whispered Hashra. "These streets are not friendly at night." They ran to the back of Silas's house, where Hashra's camel was tethered. Quickly they untied and mounted the beast. With 2 clicks of his tongue and a jab in the ribs with his heels, Hashra spurred the animal to full speed. Down the streets of Jericho they raced and out into the black desert night. Jotham clutched Hashra with all his strength as he sobbed into the back of Hashra's tunic. "Peace, my son," Hashra called back. "The angels of Jehovah are with our friends now." Just outside Jericho, Hashra left the road and shot straight up into the hills. The moon had not yet risen, and all Jotham could see was blackness. He could not even see the ground under the camel's feet. How can you see where you're going? Jotham cried, fear of being thrown to the ground overtaking his grief at what he had just witnessed. Fear not, my friend, Hashra answered over the pounding of camel hoofs. In my younger days, my friends and I raided the Roman camps outside Jericho. I have navigated these back trails on many dark nights. Jotham's bottom was getting sore from all the bouncing by the time Hashra finally slowed the camel to a walk. The camel heaved huge breaths, and Jotham thought it smelled a lot like a particular meal his mother made, a meal that caused even the sheep to run away. I believe we are safe now, Hashra said. They had climbed far into the hills and were now on top of a plateau. The wind blew hard here and would cover up their tracks the moment they were made. As they traveled on, Jotham began to breathe easier and his heart slowed down a bit. That's when the grief fully struck him and he began to sob once again. I killed them, he cried. I killed them both. Hashra stopped at the camel and lifted Jotham to the ground, shielding him from the wind and sand. Jotham, what are you saying? You have killed no one. It was Dicha, that beast. Hashra spit on the ground after speaking the name of Dicha. May Jehovah reward him richly for this deed. No, it was me, Jotham cried. Don't you see? If it weren't for me, Nathan and Silas would still be alive. Hashra hugged Jotham close. Here now, boy, you must not believe such things. Dicha alone is responsible for this evil. Jotham didn't say anything, but deep in his heart, he knew that all of this started that morning he had disobeyed his father. After a few minutes, Hashra lifted Jotham back onto the camel, and together they rode through the night. It was just before dawn when they approached a small group of clay houses with a well in front. As they approached, a tall, thin man with long gray hair came from one house, holding a lamp in front of him. Through sleepy eyes, Jotham saw that he looked as old as Moses himself. Who is that? The man shouted. Who is there? Shalom, my friend, Hashra shouted back. It is a weary traveler and a small boy. We seek refuge from marauders. Do I know this one who calls me friend? No, you do not, but we were sent by Nathan of Qumran. Would you be the priest Zechariah? I would indeed. And if you would be sent of Nathan, you truly are my friend. Come now, tell me of marauders. Quickly, they all went inside where Zechariah's wife Elizabeth was waiting in her night clothes. Hashra gently set Jotham down at a table where he was instantly asleep. A few minutes later, Hashra had explained all about Silas, Nathan, and the boy. What is Dicha doing this far south? Zechariah asked no one in particular. Then he looked at Jotham with compassion. Of course, we will be glad to hide the boy here until his family can be found. Hashra gently shook Jotham awake. Jotham, he said, this is Zechariah. He is a priest and will take care of you for a few days. I must return to my inn in Bethlehem, but I shall keep my eyes searching for your family. Jotham nodded. He had met so many people since leaving his family that he didn't think he had any more friendship to give. And now here was one more he had to part from. But he hugged Hashra tightly, then greeted Zechariah politely. And this is my little family, Zechariah said proudly. Jotham was amazed when the old man pointed to an equally old woman who was holding a brand new baby. This is my wife Elizabeth, he said, and this is my new son. His name is John. And so Jotham began another night away from his family and another night with strangers. As he looked out the window from his makeshift bed, he stared at the stars and thought about Nathan and about the terrible consequences of disobedience. He looked at his mother's star once more, and that one shone brighter than any other, and wondered if anything would ever be the same again. Throughout the Bible, we read story after story about the terrible consequences of sin. Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden. The entire world was destroyed by a flood. David committed adultery, and the son born to him died because of it. Sin has consequences, sometimes even after we're forgiven. Jotham is sad today, sad at losing Nathan and Silas, and sad that he's partially to blame. It's much more fun to think of happy things during Advent, but we must remember that the world Jesus entered was and is a cruel and evil world. Learning that there are consequences for our own sin is not very pleasant. Like Jotham, we sometimes don't understand this until we have done something that hurts someone else terribly. But then, that was exactly why Jesus came to earth, to bring us forgiveness for our disobedience, and to teach us to love one another and obey those in authority over us. Yes, Christmas is a happy time, but it's happy because God loved us enough to save us from our own selfishness. He came to show us that even when we must suffer the consequences of our actions, there is still hope and forgiveness through Jesus. Until tomorrow.